David, it's so good to see you again. It's been a long time and wonderful to be.
Welcome to my home.
Yeah, back at this beautiful home. Let's maybe start out for those who aren't familiar necessarily with all of your remarkable journey by talking a little bit about how you made the transition from scientist, from researcher, from university professor to world-renowned and respected environmental advocate and activist, media star, one of the most respected Canadians. How did this journey happen?
Well, you know, I spent 8 years in the United States getting my university education. This is at a time after the Soviet Union had launched Sputnik in 1957. And the U.S. was scrambling to catch up. And they were pouring money into setting up science departments, and they set up NASA. And, you know, here I am, a Canadian down there, and if you said, I like science, they poured money at you. And in the end, I said, you know, much as I love the vigor of the United States, there were things that I just didn't like. The obsession with money. They seemed to classify everything and grade everything according to money. And of course, the segregation that I witnessed in the southern states, I just couldn't stand it. And so I came back to Canada, because Canada was not better, but it was different. I mean, Canada had CCF, for God's sakes. In the United States, that would have been considered a communist party. Yeah. Tommy Douglas was one of my great heroes. We had Medicare, you know, and so I came back to a Canada that I valued very much. And right as I was starting my career at the University of Alberta, in 1962, I'm ready to make my mark, and a woman came into my life. Now, my regret is I never met her, but Rachel Carson wrote a book called Silent Spring, all about the unexpected effects of pesticides. And as I began to read that, I realized, oh my God, you know, we thought DDT was one of the great inventions of all time. Paul Miller won a Nobel Prize for DDT in 1948. But then as I read it, I realized science, by focusing, you know, we don't see that everything's connected. So they thought, oh, spray it on a farmer's field. Yeah, but the wind blows, it rains and washes into the rivers, and guess what? It ends up in the fish and the birds and in women's breasts. And so I realized that, powerful as science is, the ramifications of what we do ripple out into the rest of the world.
Far beyond the laboratory.
Far beyond, yes. We didn't know there was a thing called biomagnification. You spray in parts per million, but the microorganisms absorb it. They're eaten by bigger organisms. And by the time you get to the breasts of women, you've concentrated DDT hundreds of thousands of times. Biomagnification, we didn't even know that as a phenomenon. So then, of course, thanks to Rachel Carson, the environmental movement exploded around the world. And so that's how I got involved. And of course, forestry, immediate issue. And when you think of the forest companies, you know, they were claiming 50 cents of every dollar of tax revenue in BC comes from forest industry, which was not true, but they had a lot of power. Man, they wanted to get rid of me. But thank goodness I had a thing called tenure. Tenure was a privilege conferred on professors that protected us from that.
And you were at UBC at the time.
I was at UBC, yeah.
Okay, and now let's just fast forward to today. David, what are the biggest ecological issues that we are confronting today as a planet?
Well, let me tell you, all through the years that we were battling over during the 70s and 80s, we won victories. We stopped logging in certain areas. We stopped the proposal to drill for oil in Hecate Strait. We stopped a dam on the Xingu River in the Amazon. We
protected the Stein Valley.
We protected the Stein Valley. We stopped the dam at Site C.
For then.
We stopped the proposals to drill for oil next to the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. You know, we thought these were victories, but guess what? The dam at Site C is in full force. The proposal to drill for oil next to the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge is back on the table. The dam we stopped in Brazil is half built now. So what the hell's going on? What we thought were victories were just temporary because we hadn't changed the attitude, the values, the perspective. And I believe the great crisis we face now is that for almost all of human history, we knew we were deeply embedded in nature and that we lived within a web of relationships with all other species of animals and plants, with the air, the water, and the sunlight. That was the way humans lived for most of our existence. And in a web of relationships, you have an obligation, you have a responsibility. And that responsibility is to act properly so that you don't destroy the web. We've lost that. I believe it began maybe 1,000 years ago as religions arose to guide our behavior, kind of gave us the idea that humans are special. You know, in indigenous cultures, other species of animals and plants are not regarded as resources. They're our relatives. Even the plants, and genetically they're absolutely right. Most of the genes in plants and animals are identical to the genes in us because we share a common evolutionary history. But we now think, oh, we're special. And when the Renaissance came along, you had René Descartes saying, cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am. So the brain was the big thing. Forget the body, it's the brain that is who we are. And we had Isaac Newton, who said, the universe is like a giant clockwork mechanism. So we can understand the universe by looking at the parts, pull it apart and look at this, and eventually fit it back together again. So these were all factors that really began to see science, and we're so smart, and this is the secret to progress. And then you have the Industrial Revolution, when suddenly we can create machines that can work tirelessly. With machines, we can tear the tops of mountains off, redirect rivers. We can destroy whole ecosystems overnight. We can fly in vehicles faster than the speed of sound. We can escape gravity and live in outer space. So suddenly, there were no limits to human beings. We weren't limited by our biology, by the ecosystems within which we exist. All that we were restrained by was our imagination. But now we've invented machines that can think at the speed of light. Our brains think at the rate of about 100 meters a second. Computers can think at the speed of light. You know, now that they're intelligent, what are they going to be thinking in a year? They won't be able to talk to us because they'll be so far out there. So what has happened then? We think we're at the center of the action. We no longer live within a web of relationships. It's all about us. It's us. And everything, you know, and so environmentalists come along, oh, well, we have to be more careful. Okay, but it's still, we're at the center. And this, I think, is a problem. We've created the means of guiding human behavior. Religions, the economy, our political system, our legal systems are all built on the notion that we're at the center of the action. And this is the problem now. Our laws, you know, the laws are very good at defining property and human and social rights and the limits of our countries and provinces and all that. Nature doesn't give a damn about our boundaries.
Well, let me just ask you about, because one of the campaigns that you've been involved with, David, is the Blue Dot campaign. Can you talk a little bit about the Blue Dot campaign? Because this is part of what you're saying, isn't it? That as part of the web of legal rights that Canadians should be the right to a clean environment. I actually was a member of the committee that wrote the Constitution of Canada, the Charter, and I moved an amendment in 1981 to include that. But what's the Blue Dot campaign?
Well, the Blue Dot campaign was exactly that. David Boyd is a lawyer, an eminent lawyer, who came to us with the idea that we should make it a Canadian understanding that every Canadian has a right to a healthy environment. That was the blue dot was just a symbol. Our planet should be, but even that to me is flawed in the sense that we think that we can define a healthy environment. It's all still about us. And now there's, Boyd has moved on to the rights of nature. That nature should have rights, and recently in Quebec, the Magpie River was declared having rights.
A river.
A river has rights. But, the problem with the legal system is, as it's anthropocentric around us, then we think it's our right to define whether a river flows as it has for thousands of years. I think that river has rights to do that. What about a forest? A community of organisms should have a right to exist. A songbird has evolved to live out its life. Who the hell are we to define the rights of these other things? But I think the primary problem is our anthropocentrism. Our idea that we're at the center has led to us to construct an economic system which is based fundamentally on the creed of cancer. A cancer cell thinks it can divide forever, and of course it can't. And we think that we're so smart that we've created an economy dependent on human creativity and human productivity. In our economic system, nature isn't there. Partha Dasgupta has recently in the UK come out with a 600-page document showing why the economy as constructed is inevitably destructive because nature's not even there. So this is crazy. And, the eminent, Mark Carney has come back to Canada, and he's just written a book called Values. And he points out that in our crazy system, Amazon, the company, is worth hundreds of billions of dollars. Amazon, the rainforest,
Doesn't matter.
has no value in the economy until we cut it down, burn it, dam it, and flood it, or create cities or drive roads. The forest itself has no. If that isn't screwed up, I don't know what is.
Let me just come back. You mentioned a number of the victories that we won over the course, and they were really important. And in most of those victories, we were in solidarity with Indigenous peoples as well. They were on the front lines fighting in these struggles. You and I were actively involved back in the mid-'80s, for example, with the Haida Nation in fighting logging old-growth forest at Guayhanas, what they called Lyle Island. And both of us were adopted by an amazing Haida matriarch, Adi Ivanovich. You're my little brother, right? And she, of course, was one of those elders who stood on the line at Guayhanas. Can you talk a little bit about the importance of learning the lessons from Indigenous elders and leaders as well? Because that's always been at the center, I think, of what you've been teaching.
The environmentalists were happy when Indigenous people joined forces. For example, there was a battle over Mears Island, and environmentalists wanted to stop the logging that was proposed for Mears Island, and they brought the Indigenous people to say, yes, that island matters. That was great. As soon as it was protected, environmentalists walked away and left the Indigenous people there with, I think it was $1 million of legal. The Indigenous people were used by the environmentalists for their cause, but we didn't really say, look, they've got something really, really precious. They're teaching us about our relationship with the land. And that's why the Haida battle was so important. The Haida controlled that whole thing. And they fought that. If Sven Robinson wanted to come and get arrested with them, thank you very much, but we're in charge because the land, and they taught us so much in that. And even after the Haida had the land set aside as Guayhanas, they said to the government, no, the land, just because the ocean comes up to this point, what are you talking about? The land isn't separate from the ocean. And they fought for 10 more years and said that park is not complete if you don't have the ocean along with it. And then we declared that Guayhanas goes out 10 kilometers out to the ocean floor. And that is all Guayana. That is a fundamental lesson. So the point about indigenous people, you have to go back. We were born as a species, as an upright, furless ape, 150,000 years ago in Africa. I hope as a result of your speech here, the Ku Klux Klan sees it and says, Suzuki, come and talk to us. So I can tell them, we're Africans. We're all Africans. What's your problem? So we were born in Africa. That was our place. But after 40 to 50,000 years, we began to move. We don't know why. I probably the population of humans had risen to where there were clan battles going on or resources being diminished. I like to think it was teenagers, that we bred with Neanderthal people. So probably some teenagers, hey, there was a good looking Neanderthal on the other side of the mountain. Let's go, whatever it was, we began to move. And when we moved into new areas, we were an invasive species. We didn't know how it all, oh, wow, look at those birds. They can't fly and they're yummy to eat. Or those slow-moving sloths. And you can follow as we moved across the planet. We extinguished all kinds of the big, slow-moving species. So the people that stayed in these new territories, they had to say, look, we can't keep going on. Look, there aren't many left. They had to learn through the mistakes of their ancestors.
These were the indigenous peoples in those
territories. Those are the people who became the indigenous people because the successes, the failures, the mistakes were all a part of their knowledge base that taught them how to live. And that is the way it is around the world. The indigenous people embody the knowledge that has been hard won through their ancestors who were the invasive ones that came to these new. So this is priceless. And the cultures of those indigenous people is intimately tied to the language. The language embodies so much. So I think, we're worried today about species extinction. But cultural and language extinction is every bit as critical.
Well, and there's a beautiful sequel to the story of Guayhanas as well in your own family, David. We were adopted by Ada Jovanovic, and of course, Ada's grandson is now married to your daughter.
That's right.
Severin, which is pretty amazing. And I have to say as well,
so is this incest?
No. This is family joy. And I have to say as well, if I can, just how thrilled many of us are that Severin is going to be taking on the role of executive director of the David Suzuki Foundation as well. It's wonderful. So one of the key tools for change for Gandhi was civil disobedience.
Yes.
And of course, civil disobedience has led to some significant victories here in British Columbia as well. The biggest was Clayoquot Sound in the summer of 1993, over 800 people arrested. Again, you were speaking front and center on that. I was arrested, and it was interesting because when I was actually sentenced by Judge Wally Opal, he was a judge.
Wow.
Wally was the judge that sentenced me. He specifically referred to civil disobedience, and I've got a copy of here's what he said. He said, the civil disobedience practiced by Mahatma Gandhi and Martin Luther King contemplated the acceptance of full consequences of the law. In fact, after one such act, Gandhi was reputed to have said to a British judge, I do not ask for mercy. I do not plead any extenuating circumstances. I am here, therefore, to invite and cheerfully submit to the highest penalty that can be inflicted upon me. Those were Gandhi's words. Can you talk a little bit about the importance of civil disobedience, not just historically, but we're looking today at Fairy Creek, for example, where people are being arrested for standing up for old-growth forests. Why has that made a difference?
Well, it's what attracts attention, of course. I'm really disappointed that Mike Harcourt, who was premier during the Clayoquot protests, where over 800 people were arrested. I heard Mike in an interview years later saying, no, that didn't make a damn bit of difference to me. I called a halt to the logging because of the indigenous people. I think that's BS. I think that's post. The fact is that it was those arrests that really focused attention in the same way that it did at Windy Bay in Haida Gwaii. And unfortunately, those seem to be the ways that get more publicity. I think of Greta Thunberg, one child, a teenage child, just sitting there with a sign saying something about for climate. And when asked, why are you leaving school once a week, she's just said, they teach us to take science seriously, and the scientists tell us I don't have a future the way we're going.
Well, let me ask you about that, because you are now an elder yourself, David.
Sure am.
You're a respected elder, fount of wisdom. Many of the people that are viewing this will be young people. What would your message be to those young people who ask, and they've asked, how can I make a difference? I mean, you mentioned Greta Thunberg, but what would your message be to those young people today who want to desperately to make sure that we do still have a planet?
Well, I think it's a very dire time. When I met Greta, the first thing I said to her was, I am so sorry. You should not, this is not something you should be doing. Mom and Dad should be the eco warriors on your behalf. For a child, your job, your role is to go out and you're leaving the nest and making new relationships. When you're a teenager, you're starting to date, you're starting to look at what are the things that excite me, what turns me on, what am I good at. You're preparing to go into the adult world. That's your job. Adults are the ones that should be looking out for your future. But then I said, thank you for doing what you're doing, but it's because we have been derelict in our responsibility. Young people come to me all the time and say, well, what should I do to save the earth? Don't worry about the earth. The earth is doing fine. The earth has been here for over 4.5 billion years. And it did very, very well before there were any human beings around. What has happened is we are altering the very conditions that allow us to survive. As that's the threat, not the planet. The planet's not under any trouble at all. And what is it that they can do right now? I always told people, youngsters, find out what turns you on. What do you love to do? What are you good at? And then whenever you go into it, whether it's music or art or garage mechanics or plumbing, whatever you like to do and do well, make sure it is environmentally sustainable. That's what the change is. We all have to begin to live in a different way. But right now we have had a dereliction of responsibility of past generations in government, and we now have a very narrow window of opportunity. And we don't have time now for this generation to come up and replace us. And so what I say is, I'm sorry, but you're going to have to get involved in politics. There are all kinds of things we can all do, turn out the lights and don't waste water and all of that stuff, which we have to do. But we need transformative change now, big change, and we elect people to office to do those big things for us. And so I'm saying, as young people, you have to register, but first, get mom and dad. Get aunts and uncles, get grandma and grandpa. They've got to be politically involved. Don't care what party. You've got to go, and anybody saying, I'm running for office, you've got to say, if you don't make climate change, species extinction, social justice, equity, if those aren't your highest priority, forget it. We're not interested in voting for you. We've got to make these issues apolitical. They're no longer political issues.
They're survival issues.
They're survival issues. They're for all of us. So, and the only way to get out of the terrible blockage right now is everything is political. That's crazy. How can climate change be a liberal or an NDP or a green issue? Those are an issue every party has to deal with. And you look at the terrible divisiveness of the political situation in the United States and look at how their response to COVID was. COVID was a medical, scientific issue. The advice was there on how to deal with it. And you have someone that says, no, you wear a mask, you're a Democrat. You know, like, this is crazy. And we have an election coming up probably this fall. These issues have to be the dominant commitment of every candidate for office. And we've got to say, if I'm going to vote for you, you damn well better have these as your highest priority.
You know, Gandhi fought many, many struggles, and he always exuded sort of a sense of hope and strength and justice. And for many of us, we see that with you as well, that you've said, look, there are these major challenges, but still you give people a sense of hope. Can you perhaps, what gives you hope today that we will be able to survive this?
I think hope is absolutely necessary, but the reality is that you only have to look at the history of Canada on the issue of climate change. We held the first major international conference on the environment. 46 governments came to it in Toronto in 1988. 26 of those government members were cabinet members. This is a big deal. The conference was opened by the Prime Minister of Canada, Brian Mulroney.
Stephen Lewis chaired the conference.
Stephen Lewis chaired the conference. Gro Harlem Brundtland, the Prime Minister of Norway, was there. James Hansen, the climatologist who said it's happening and humans are contributing, gave one of the talks. At the end of the conference, the press release said, "We are performing an experiment with the planet, with consequences second only to all-out nuclear war."
And remind me, this was in 1988.
1988. They called for a 20% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions in 15 years. That was the call. If we had done it, we wouldn't have the problem we have now. But we didn't. 1992, you had the Earth Summit in Rio. Stabilized 1990 levels by the year 2000. We signed it. We didn't do a damn thing. 1997, Kyoto. We were there. We ratified Kyoto, reduce emissions by 5 to 6% below 1990 levels by the year 2010. We didn't do anything. We then, when Harper was elected, we are the only country that signed and ratified Kyoto to jump out of the Kyoto target. 2015, the Harper regime's over. We now have Trudeau in. Canada's back, signed the Paris Agreement, and then 2 years later, buy a pipeline. Like, what the hell is going on? Canada's history is bleak. But we do have a historical event that should give everyone hope. In 1939, because we were with the Commonwealth, we went to war with Germany. And if you look at the history, Canada was a rinky-dink country of 11 million people. And for the first months after we agreed to go to war, everybody sat around going, "Oh, is there a war? Like, what the hell's going on?" Then we said, okay, we're at war now. 1 million Canadians signed up to put their lives on the line by joining the armed services. That's the commitment we made. And then we had, in 1939, we had 8 companies that produced 40 aircraft a year. We were the 4th largest aviation manufacturer in the world.
So what we have to do is fight a good war.
Exactly.
Seth Klein's book, we got to fight a good war, and climate is the enemy.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah.
Exactly. And look at what they did. You know, to confront that battle, C.D. Howe set up 28 corporations. What do you call them? They're
crown corporations.
Crown corporations to do what the private sector wasn't doing. But then he hired executives from the private sector to work for $1 a year. They were called $1 a year salarymen. They came and ran the crown corporations. And there was a profit tax. They imposed a tax legislation so that you could not profiteer from war. There was a limit on how much you could make on that. And you know, there were just people grew victory gardens and invested in Canadian.
So we did it then, we can do it now.
Exactly, exactly.
Thank you, brother. You give us hope, you inspire us, and
it's very late.
Thank you for a lifetime of dedication to justice and the environment.
Thank you.